So I'm going to turn it over to Corey. Corey, you good?
Yep, I'm good.
Perfect.
So yeah, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us today. Yeah, with the weather conditions we've had, we've seen some challenges out there, and so wanted to use the opportunity today to give you a chance. Well, one, we'll kind of tell you what we're seeing. Dennis will walk you through some of the things that we're seeing out in the field and running into, and then two, to give you some ideas, to help yourself to take a look at things and see for yourself and see if you need to give us a call. So, I mean, there's a big range in things out there, as Dennis will show you and as we'll talk about, from some fields needing to be replanted to some being just fine and some in between. And so it's it's been a bit of a challenge here, and we've been out looking around and taking a look at things, but we thought it'd be good. There's been a lot of questions and a lot of things going on. We thought it'd be good to kind of give you this overview as what's happening, and then and take it from there and see if you have any questions we can answer. So Dennis, if you're ready to go.
Thanks, Corey. So yeah, the questions on the frost freeze really started, over a week ago already. We could see it in the forecast. Started to get a lot of calls, what was going to happen, what effect was it going to have on the crop. But we really didn't know, when you come into freezing temperatures and night lows, you're always concerned, but you really don't know. You don't know how cold it's going to get. It started out as a forecast of, I believe the first time I saw it was like 27, 28. And then we dropped a lot colder than that, than what they originally forecasted, a week before it happened. So you just never know. It's one of those things that's really hard to predict and to know what kind of effect it's going to have. But here we are, Monday after the last freezing event of Wednesday night, and we still don't exactly know what kind of result we have. So it just takes some time. So last week we had 2 nights of temperatures that, fell well below freezing. Obviously Wednesday night was colder than Tuesday night. And it varied quite a bit, those low temperatures across the growing area, both in Michigan and Ontario. So this is just, this is from our beatcast stations. This is the low from over Wednesday night. Did vary quite a bit. All gray, got the coldest at just under 19 degrees. We had a lot of the low 20s over here in the west, 22, 23 degrees. In through the thumb here was 23 to 25. Down over right south of Carroll, got down to 20 degrees. So, there was definitely some area of concern. The northern part of the Ontario region got, down to 4 to 5 degrees below 0 Celsius. So we definitely had some temperatures, lows that were long enough to cause damage, and we are seeing some injury out in the field. So these pictures were taken, I believe I took these on Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, I can't remember which way, but this was what we would call typical freeze injury that we would see. Here we got a beet that was just 2 beets that were just emerging. This is a normal, healthy beet with really no issue, just below the soil surface. And on the left is more where we can see the cotyledons are black and the arch is black. So this beet was likely gonna die just from the cold. And that's normally what we see when we look at freeze injury. Over here we have 2 emerged beets. One looks pretty healthy, green cotyledons with the tips just yellow, and another one right next to it that's more turning black. So that's quite a bit of damage. And, even at this point with this picture, you don't know if this beet's going to make it or not, because as long as that growing point's alive, it can lose its cotyledons and still live. So this is what we would call typical freeze injury. So we see that this year, but that's probably not what we're seeing the majority of our damage being. It's a little more atypical this year, and I'll get into that more in a little bit. So one thing we did throughout the company is we took, put some flags in and count beets before the weather event happens. So on Tuesday afternoon, we see what we got for beets up in 100 feet. And then this is a stand count from today. So if you look at 3 different fields here, so we have the planting date, field 1, field 2, field 3, all planted on March 23rd. April 20th, so last Tuesday, had 188 beets. Today it has 168 beets. So definitely lost, went back 20 beets in 100 feet. This field 2, planted at the same time, lost a few, but really, a really good stand to start with. Maybe probably even too thick of a stand. Basically every beet came up, and still has that good stand today. In field 3, basically the same thing, similar to field 1 as far as the first count, but did not lose as many. So we are seeing that in the March beets, we are losing some stand. But in general, if we're at a high, a good population to start with, it looks like there's going to be enough beets survive that we're really not concerned. The issue with the March planted beets is if you were at a marginal stand to start with, in the low hundreds for a stand, and now we start to lose, 10 to 15% of their stand, maybe we're not going to have enough to keep in the end. And what we're seeing for injury in the March planted beets is this. So on the right, we would have a normal, healthy, this is what I'd call a pretty normal, healthy seedling. Hypocotyl is white. But what we're seeing is this shrinking here, and it gets pretty thread-like. Here I have 2 of the 3 plants, that's just an example. In this field, the majority of the plants were like this, but you do see some of these, they're starting to flop in the wind. The top is becoming top heavy. That's why this one is all crooked over, this one in the middle on the left. Picture on the right is the same thing, just from a different field, but we get that thread-like hypocotyl versus a normal healthy plant from the same field. And this one you can see it's got some tips of the cotyledons that burn. So this is really the injury we're seeing more common this year. We're not exactly sure why. In these March planted beets, it could have been some seedling disease that got amplified by the cold weather, so the beet was already a little weak. We maybe didn't realize that there was some seedling disease, and the cold weather made that more of a concern. But in general, I think the March planted beets are relatively straightforward. If you have a good stand, and we lose some, we're going to be okay. It's going to be those marginal fields that were a little marginal from a previous cold weather event that we're going to have to watch the closest and maybe potentially replant. Looking at some April planted fields. So once again, I have 3 fields, all planted April 8th. Took a stand count last Tuesday. First field went from 150 to 178 beets from last Tuesday to today. So that's a good trend. Field 2 went from 86 to 118, and field 3 actually went backwards from 128 to 114. So none of these fields are very far apart. They're probably a few miles from each other, but you can see the variation. This field 1, looks pretty good. Really not concerned. I'm really not concerned about that field at all. I have a hard time when I look in that field to even find a beet that has that thread-like hypocotyl. Field 2 I'm pretty concerned about, and field 3 I'm somewhat concerned about, but field 2 I'm the most concerned about actually. Even though that stand count went up, it just seems to have more damage. So what are we seeing in the April planted beets? I would say we're seeing a little similar to March planted beets, but the crop is further behind developmentally, so the symptoms are the same but different. This is hold on. So this is from field 2, the one I said I was the most concerned about, where we actually went up in stand. And I started scratching through the surface, finding beets, and this is what I found. So I'm actually going to go backwards from number 7 to number 1. So this is a normal, healthy beet. This one doesn't look too bad. We're getting some discoloration of the hypocotyl right through here, and that's generally what anybody that watched the video last week, that's what I tried to point out. About a ½ inch below the surface, we'd often see the hypocotyl starting to be discolored and unhealthy. Number 5 is a little worse. Number 4 is even worse. This one's got thread-like all the way up into the growing point and into the cotyledons. So it's not doing very well. The likelihood of that survival is not very good. Then we have this group here that still needed to emerge. And if you look at our stand counts, that makes sense. We're at too low of a stand yet. But if we got these coming, but these aren't very healthy either. We got, once again, the hypocotyl is thread-like on these that haven't emerged, similar to what it is on some of these. So it's in a field like this is pretty concerning, but I would say this is generally not, right now like this, I don't feel like this is the norm. Yeah, are we seeing some plants like this? But this field is a little more severe than most fields. And generally I would see it more like this, where we have healthy ones and then some just with a little bit of discoloration and some damage. Corey, do you want to add anything there? Is that what you're seeing too as you've been out looking in the field?
Yeah, that shows exactly a lot of what we've been seeing, Dennis. Yeah, in our gray, we had a lot of those April beets. We saw some fields that look exactly just like that field that you examined. So, in some of those cases, we had a few fields that, we decided on Friday that were going to be replanted because they had a lot of those thread-like beets. So we probably, if you say in 10 beets, 8 and 10 beets were thread-like, and that's what is kind of odd with this frost, normally you'd say, oh, you should be able to start to see those beets that look really tough dropping off, especially like today. But I think because it's been so cool, we're not seeing those beets. It's not really obvious that they're gone yet. So, that's why it takes a little time, like Dennis is saying, to evaluate that, because some fields it's really easy to see, okay, those are replant situations. Others, they're in between a little bit. And so it's going to take a little bit of time, and I think with this weather coming up, by the end of the week, we'll know where we need to be. But yep.
So here's some more pictures, I guess. I don't know how good you can see it, but I think it's kind of common. You can see a lot of these. You would look at the above ground portion, and you would think they're healthy. Like there's nothing wrong with it. I'd walk on the field and say, hey, looks like there's about 200 beets. They look great. But it's really when you start to dig this up and see the hypocotyl being off colored. Here you can see it in this one. It doesn't look too bad above ground, but right there, that's getting pretty thin. It just continues to be those symptoms of a shrunken, shriveled hypocotyl. That's really what we're looking at for the most part. And like Corey said, it's just going to take some time. We don't know exactly. We don't know exactly what to do with those yet. It's encouraging and it's discouraging. It's encouraging that they're still alive today. So here we are, the last cold event, that did that damage was Wednesday. It's Monday, and the beets are still alive. So that can be encouraging, but we really don't know which way they're going to go at this point. And when you have beets that look healthy above ground, even with and with some damage below ground, I guess our opinion is generally we want to wait that out and see what happens going forward. The yield potential is so much higher if we can keep the stand, and have enough beets that are healthy, emerge with a good enough population versus replanting. So why does the injury vary from field to field? Well, I think a lot of it's got to do with the stage of the crop development. And that can be due to planting date and time, planting depth. So generally probably planting deeper, potentially makes the crop develop slower. The soil warms a little long. It takes a little longer to warm. It's planted in the cooler conditions. It's not going to germinate quite so fast, or it's going to germinate faster when it's higher. And that can either be good or bad. The speed of emergence, some varieties just emerge faster than others when you plant them. There can be some low temperature variations from field to field. It's not uncommon for the temperature to vary a degree or two just in a short distance. And when we're that close, we're right on the edge of injury versus no injury. That small temperature change can make a huge difference in how it affects the crop. So it really becomes down to each field needing to be evaluated almost on a case-by-case basis. There's really no way just to say, yeah, we're all good everywhere, or yeah, we're all bad. It's going to take a lot of scouting and a lot of walking fields. So what do we do going forward? So injury varies a lot from field to field. Some fields look great. Others are at a higher risk for replants. In general, I haven't suggested to very, very little replant is what I've suggested so far. Most of it's in a holding pattern, but there is some. We want to continue to evaluate fields. That includes taking stand counts, so actually how many beets you have, multiple stand counts throughout the field. Dig up plants to see if there's any beets emerging yet, how those look, how the hypocotyl looks on those that have emerged. And probably one of the biggest things I can stress is just to try to be patient. I know it's really tough. We want to make a decision. The weather's, field conditions are good right now, and we would all love to be out there planting if field needs to be done. But sometimes we just need to take a break, step back, and let nature run its course and see how things develop going forward. I think that's all I have. Corey, do we have any questions or anything? Corey, you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great summary, Dennis, from what we're seeing out there. I mean, like you mentioned, it's across the board, needs individual consideration. Yeah, there's, we probably saw a little more damage in Au Gres right off the bat just because they were colder there. So But yeah, there were some fields that are on edge too, up in Au Gres as well. So yeah, it is an odd situation when you look at the way the temperatures varied, how the changes, and that's what happens sometimes when you're right on edge. If we were sitting at about, what the forecast was right around 24, 25, if that had been low, and then you get where maybe it dips down just to the 24, 25 for a short period, and then we're more 27, 28 like we were last night. There's not as big of a risk. And then, what happened there, because we saw a little bit of damage even from the Tuesday night cold, but not terrible in some fields at all. But it was really that Wednesday night, those deep cold temperatures, and that was a bit of a surprise. When you start getting below the mid-20s, things can happen. So yeah.
We've got a couple of questions. 2 people raised their hands, so I'm going to allow the first one to talk. Ken Vandenboom, do you have a question? Oh.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Are you seeing that wheat stubble being worse than corn and soybean stubble this year?
I have evaluated some wheat versus soybean stubble, and we have seen some cases where wheat stubble was a little worse. I think, though, that goes back to what Dennis talked about, and that was actually more so maybe even in the March beets. We had a couple fields of wheat stubble that looked worse, and I would my explanation for that is maybe there's actually the soil warmed up and those beets were in a little bigger stage even than where the beets were in the corn stubble because the soil was warmer. And so like when the March freeze hit, because you remember the March, back looking at March, we actually just started evaluating some of those beets even last week. And so, and they've been in for quite a while. And we did notice that the wheat stubble is a little worse, and I think it's because they were a little ahead, and so they were further along when the freeze happened, and so that did damage them. So, like Dennis mentioned, it just depends what stage the crop's at. Sometimes when they're further along, that was not as good than not being as far along. And again, they're a little more as they're coming through. That's probably the most vulnerable stage that beets can be in.
Yeah, so it could be more due to the fact of the residue than it is actually what the previous crop was. And, sometimes being more advanced, developmentally and emerging quicker is better, and it can hit you favorably with weather. And then other times it can be unfavorable. So, but yeah, we can see a difference from crop to crop, and it's probably just due to speed of emergence and the stage of development when the inclement weather hits.
Well, maybe you should get a hold of me. We could go out and take a look at a field of mine because it's about a 20-acre field. The rows run north and south. The south half of that 20 acres was soybean stubble, and the north half of it was wheat stubble. And right to the line, the wheat stubble, I think, is going to get replanted, and the soybean stubble is going to stay. I think there was something more than frost out there in that wheat stubble this year that we're seeing more dead beets out there in the wheat stubble.
Yep, we can do that and come take a look at them. No problem. Yeah, we're out looking. Guys are out looking right now. So, yep.
Okay, thanks, Ken. I'm gonna
Yep,
move
thank
on.
you.
Charlie Lewis.
Yes. Hey, so, thanks. My question was, we should be finished up with all of our sugar beet planting tomorrow. I did stand counts in all of our fields that got planted in March and earlier in April. If you've got those really pinched off beets that you're looking at, you probably got about 4 days of corn planting. Would you recommend that we switch over and plant corn and come back to the sugar beets then? I'm going to finish our stand counts recounting again today, but it seems like we have at least a 10 to 15% loss in most of them. And then there's some beets, like you say, that look healthy, but they're very pinched off.
So yeah, I guess I'll give you my personal opinion. I think if you have a good stand of beets right now, and you've done stand counts, and I think you have to wait it out and see what those ones that are, as you've said, pinched off or have the shrunken hypopedal, see what happens going forward. So yeah, if you want to go plant corn, I would say go for it and come back in a few days. And I'm hopeful that the warmer weather tomorrow will kind of advance one way or the other, and we'll have maybe a little better answer in the next few days with some warm temperatures tomorrow. But I just hate to give up on a crop that a beet that's emerged and still alive.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, we have some questions I can kind of answer as we're going through some of them off the Q&A.
Do you want me to read the question?
I can do that too. I can kind of paraphrase the question. One of them was, do we contact other people from other areas about what their experience has been? Yeah, we commonly do. I mean, we have a lot of experience from the past, as well as chat with other people from other areas to see what's going on. So we do. That's something, that we do. We consult each other a lot. We look at what each other's seeing, so we try to get everybody's perspective on the situation, see where it's going to go. Related to that, another question was, beet showing thread-like symptoms or showing some damage, what potential does it have long-term? And yeah, that's really a good question. And that's part of what we use to evaluate the situation. And that's a little bit, and there was another question kind of in there saying, well, how long does it take to determine, when you're going to have what you're going to have? And so each of those is a separate decision point. When you look into a field, sometimes, you can tell right away, okay, this field's in trouble or this field's good. That's real easy to determine. If there's no thread-like, that roots look healthy, okay, we're either good or we're in trouble. That's actually the easiest decision to make. Then when it gets more challenging is when we start to see, anywhere in between, like Dennis showed you, that range of beets. And so each field can have a number of those beets and a range of those beets. And then, are they going to die, or are they going to develop, they're opening up for potential seedling disease, either Aphanomyces or Rhizoctonia. And so that's something you have to consider as well, how good that stand is, how many healthy beets versus not healthy. And then another question that was in there is, well, how many beets do you recommend to keep, right? So that can really vary. It varies by field, by row spacing, by how the beets are spread out. So, you can get really good yields with beets, as, and in the past, people would keep beets at 100 beets per 100-foot a row, pretty common. But, it really depends on that field, on that situation. Generally, I mean, we let, 150 is always a real safe number. That's usually considered a safe number, but it really, again, depends on how well spread out they are, what the overall health of the field is, and it's really an individual field by field situation. Those are just some general rules of thumb that we do. Replant seed. So I know the seed companies have some replant seed around. So if you need some help with that, we can help you find that. But I know the seed companies have been very aggressive in trying to plan ahead, and they were concerned about this situation as well. So I think we do have a fair amount of replant seed available for them.
Yeah, I know we've been talking to the seed companies almost daily, letting them know what we're seeing in the field, what we think is happening, how we're feeling about replants, just so they can try to plan. They've been bringing seed from West, getting it packaged and delivered. So we continue to be in contact with them. I would say pretty much on a daily basis, just to give them some sort of an update on what we're thinking and versus what they're doing on a seed supply.
Question on Quadras and replanting. If you have Quadras already applied, there's no need to replant with Quadras, unless you have really think that field's got a terrible rhizoc situation. But usually, that would be a special case. Usually we recommend not add Quadras back to it if you can get into the row. But if you do have a strong risk of rhizoc, that would not be a bad idea to put Quadras in. So feel free to contact us if you have some direct questions about that.
Corey, would that be, hey, Corey, would that be regardless if you're working the field or not?
Oh, if you're working, yeah, if you're working the field, that could be a different situation. Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, if you're planning back into the row, if you're working the field, I would recommend actually adding the Quadras back in to that, because you could dilute that out versus, but if you're planning back into the row, you're probably fine. Thank you, Dennis. Yep. We did have a question there on regions that have more replants. Augray definitely got hit, unfortunately, pretty hard. We're seeing, we were up there on Friday, and there was probably per region, they definitely had more damage, and that makes sense. I mean, based on they were the coldest area. So they'll probably have more replants. We're still evaluating. We've had some that were definitely replant fields. We determined that. We have some others we're still watching, to see if they might make it or not. So we're still, waiting on that part of it, but definitely that. Also kind of question, well, between Quadras and no Quadras, are we seeing more or less injury? Not that I'm aware of. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting is we've had growers, there's been some discussion about using copper and spraying copper on ahead of the freeze to see if it would help or not. I did do a treatment on that. I didn't notice any difference looking at the beets with the copper. So, if growers want to try stuff like that and you have some treatments you want us to evaluate, be glad to come out and take a look at it if you've done some strips or you had left some checks or did some things. We have, been trying to look at some things like that. Are there some products that could help with freeze? For example, salicylic acid or wart remover has been one thing that's been talked about as a potential antifreeze type product. We haven't had a chance to test something like that. The challenge with that too is how cold is it going to get? If it gets too cold, it can, and that's kind of when, the fruit, if you've been listening to the fruit industry, they spray their flowers with copper, and there's a bacteria that is in the flowers that actually lowers the freezing point. So the copper kills the bacteria, so that keeps it, raises the freezing point, I should say. So they'll actually freeze at a higher temperature with that bacteria. If you think about the beet, I mean, we're pretty close to the ground. So even if we spray that, are we really killing all the bacteria or not? So that's the theory behind using the copper in fruit. And just haven't seen the trial I did the other day. I just didn't see any difference in that part of it. So, but if you have any treatments out there that you want us to look at, some growers did it last year too, and they didn't seem to, it got too cold and I think froze right through some of it. So we didn't have a lot of results, but discussion's been out there. So I thought I'd share that with you.
So
Have any more questions as of now, unless someone has another one they want to ask?
one of the questions was, I don't know if we answered, was how long to wait? How long should we wait going forward? I don't think, we don't have a number or a date to put on it. I would like to think by the end of the week, we'll pretty much have an answer on most of these fields on which way they went. But that may not be the case either. I guess my feeling has always been, I have a hard time giving up on a crop that's, especially sugar beets, that's up and alive. So if you have a stand, and I think you just need to wait it out. You know, if we have a stand with unhealthy hypocotyls, I think we need to wait that out a little while and see which way we go. I think relatively soon we're going to know whether that beet starts to grow and recover or if it goes backwards.
So if people have questions, who do they call?
So your field consultant, they are all out in the field every day. They've been out in the last week after the cold weather today. So just start with your field consultants. They're happy. We're all happy to come look at your fields. And that's what we're doing. We're scouting fields right now.
We had one more question come in. 2x2 on replant.
2x2 on replant. So Generally, I don't recommend to go back in and put 2x2 on replant, especially if you're definitely not if you're gonna not work the field and just plant into your previous planter tracks. That 2x2 fertilizer is still there. If you're gonna work the field, sometimes I'll go in at a lower rate just to supply a little more nitrogen close to the seedling, close to the seed, so it gets off to a better start. But generally speaking, if you're not working the field, I don't see any reason to. That fertilizer is still there. If you're going to work the field, it maybe isn't a bad idea to come back with a low rate.
All right. There's no more questions. I think we're good.
All right, thank you. See you guys out there.
Thanks everybody for taking the time to hop on.